Let us now look at a few examples of how cultural exchanges, mainly migration, has influenced, or how cuisine has evolved because of these. You would have all eaten pasta, or at least heard of this Italian dish. For a long time, it was believed that Marco Polo, who was an Italian trader and traveler, during his visits in the 13th century to China, came across the Chinese noodles, and he brought that recipe back to Italy, and that's how pasta was born. What if I told you that the Italians already had pasta, because in the 9th century, when the Arabs invaded Sicily, they had a dish called aush, which they started cooking in their new territory, which resembled the Chinese noodles. But so it was 400 years before Marco Polo set on his travels that Italians were already eating pasta. We've all eaten pickles. So pickling is generally a preservation technique. It is used to preserve any kind of food so that you can eat it at a later time. Pickling as a food was also given to the world by the Arabs. Since most of the Middle East is desert area, and there is sparse growth of vegetables, fruits, and these were mainly nomads that lived there. They traveled from place to place during war, etc. So pickling was an important activity for them, because they could preserve the food and carry it with them and eat it when food was not readily available. This is how pickling has come into the world. Two examples, or a few examples of cultural exchanges influencing food. One is the Parsi food, for example. Parsis as a community are originally from Persia, and because of issues with religious freedom in Persia, which is modern day Iran, they fled to India and landed up in Gujarat, where a local king allowed them to stay. Now, at that time, the Parsi food was heavily influenced by Persian food, which was mainly grilled meats, etc. But over time, Parsi cuisine has adapted from Indian food. They've learned how to use spice. If you know, Gujaratis put a little bit of sweetness in most of the food that they eat. So a lot of the sweet and spicy stuff that Parsi food is all about comes from their Gujarati influence. They have also borrowed from the British cuisines, because Parsis as a community were closest to the British during the British occupation of India. Another cuisine I'd like to speak about is Anglo-Indian food. Now, this was a completely new cuisine that was born during the British Raj, with British soldiers getting married to Indian women, traders, people settling down in India. So their children were the first Anglo-Indians in the world. And it's a very interesting cuisine with traditional British dishes with the use of some Indian spices, etc. It is unfortunately on the wane now, because the community itself is shrinking. Many of them have migrated out. Most of them have married outside the community, etc. I now come to a South Indian example. The idli and sambar are inseparable from each other. The idli is always eaten with the sambar. But what if I told you that idli is actually not South Indian? The Hindu kings from Indonesia, somewhere around the 10th or 11th century, who traveled, brought a dish called kedli, which was actually Indonesian. It is actually a steaming technique, and they made these rice cakes with them. So that is the origin of the idli. But the sambar is a much more recent invention. Sambar is named after the Maratha king Sambhaji, who was visiting the Thanjavur kingdom, and he loved to eat a Maharashtrian dish called amti, which is like a dal or a curry or something like that. And so the chefs from Thanjavur tried to make an amti with whatever ingredients they had, and the king loved it very much, and it was hence named after him. And that's how the sambar came into being. Later on, some people decided to pair the idli with the sambar and realized it's a great combination. So that's how many ingredients, for example, the potato is a South American ingredient. It was first grown in South of America. It was European sailors who brought it back to Europe, and then when the European Empire expanded, they took the potato all over the world. Rice is supposed to be, it's the widest, most widely eaten grain in the world today. Is supposed to have originated somewhere in Korea. It was again the European sailors who, visiting the Far East for trade, etc., brought back rice to Europe. They learned how to grow it. They took it all over the world. In north of India, paneer is a delicacy. It is part of most celebrations, eaten at home all the time. The paneer is actually a Mongol invention. It was an accidental invention by the Mongols. They were carrying milk transporting milk in bags made of camel leather. And the milk kind of, because of the temperature and all that, spoiled and became paneer. So when the Mongols tasted it, it tasted nice. And the Afghans then borrowed this recipe from the Mongols and brought it to India, where it is such a delicacy now. Well, I've been a chef for over 20 years now. And, a lot has changed in my time. So we'll look at a few of these major changes. Cuisines evolve all the time. As we speak, some chef somewhere is innovating with some ingredients, etc., and evolving the cuisines that they specialize in. Food, the major changes in the last 20 years or so, especially from the Indian context, is that in the early 90s, India opened up their doors, the liberalization happened, India opened up to world products and all that. We started importing a lot of ingredients. Our farmers started to grow these ingredients locally. So while in the early 90s to mid 90s we were importing, and then later on our farmers started growing it themselves. I'll give you a little story. So we were getting something called haricot beans from Holland at the time in the hotel that I was working at. And while opening a pack of haricot beans, I came across a sticker which gave the address and name of a Bangalore-based seed company. So we were perplexed as to how this would have come here. On investigation, we found that this Bangalore company was growing the haricot beans here, exporting them to Holland, and we in India were importing it back. So anyways, and then we started buying directly from the farmers here. So things like asparagus, things like baby corn, artichokes, etc. were not really part of the Indian food repertoire till then. It was chefs who were exposed to these ingredients, started using these ingredients in everyday food, and that's how things have evolved after that. The next thing that has influenced food in the last 15-20 years is travel. More and more people are traveling today, getting exposed to newer cuisines. So people are looking for, and they're experiencing authentic culinary experiences in the countries that they go to. So when they come back to their own country, they expect restaurants to serve those authentic dishes. So if I went to an Italian restaurant, I would expect authentic Italian food or authentic French food or authentic Chinese food to be served to me, because I've been exposed to that. It cannot be the same old stuff that restaurants were serving. There was a trend of the multi-cuisine Indian, Chinese, Mughlai kind of restaurants, which is on the wane now. It is getting less and less. So restaurants are getting more specific to the kind of foods or to the kind of cuisines that they are serving. Chefs have also worked on the presentation of food, which is like in all walks of life, presentation, fashion, etc. is getting very important, and chefs not to be left behind. It is almost putting art on a plate. So presentation techniques, presentations have improved in the last 15-20 years by leaps and bounds. The next thing chefs have done is experimenting with unusual ingredients. In my hotel, for example, we do some unusual stuff with spiced chocolates with chili. There is a cheese family called blue cheese, which is extremely pungent. So we do an ice cream with blue cheese. We do a chocolate dessert with olive oil. So these kind of unusual ingredients have entered. Foreign chains of restaurants that have come into India have also adapted their own recipes to Indian ingredients, to Indian spices. McDonald's, for example, when they came into India, decided to do away with their most famous Mac burger, which is essentially a beef burger, and they came up with something called an aloo tikki burger, which was not served anywhere outside of McDonald's in India. Some of the other trends that we have seen is vegetarianism is on the rise. So a lot of emphasis by restaurant chefs is placed on having an adequate number, or at least an equal number, of vegetarian dishes for guests who come. A few of the other trends are lactose intolerant meals, organic meals, vegan meals, gluten meals that cater to people with gluten intolerance, etc. Another factor that is on the rise is environmental friendly foods, so that you reduce the carbon footprint of the foods that you're eating. While in the early 90s we were importing, the trend now is to use local ingredients. While the recipes might be out from outside of India, might be European, might be Chinese, etc., but the ingredients that you use to make those dishes are local. Another trend is elevating humble ingredients into gourmet dishes. So, for example, a bitter gourd, which is a Karela in Hindi, I'm not sure what the Kannada this thing is, but it is, so elevating that to make a gourmet dish out of it. And one more trend I'd like to speak about is hyper-regional or hyper-local. If you went to Delhi in the 90s or even in the early 2000s, all they knew about South Indian food was idli, sambar, dosa, vada. Okay, but today what is happening is that restaurants are, Karnataka, for example, has 8 or 9 culinary regions. Mandya has their own cuisine. Coorg has its own cuisine. Belgaum has its own cuisines. So you have restaurants coming around these local or hyper-local cuisines. An important trend in the last 20 years or so was molecular gastronomy, where the characteristics of a food item were changed or the flavor intensified by use of chemicals. And so it came and it is on the decline now, but it was a very important food movement at the time. The next is new equipment that came in. There were equipment like thermocirculators, pacojets, anti-griddle, which either helped efficiency or helped retain better flavors, or helped foods to cook faster or more evenly, etc. Now, what does the future look like? Well, we can only predict. But one thing for certain is that automation in professional kitchens and in home kitchens will keep going on. While we've seen equipment, the rate at which automation will come into kitchens will be much more than before. A couple of other promising trends, we're not sure how they will go, one is factory grown meats. So you won't have to slaughter an animal to have meat on the table. While slaughtering a meat has its own environmental concerns and all that. So this is a promising trend, in lab trials, etc. are going on. Let's see how it goes, but we are expecting it to hit markets in the not too distant future. Or tailored meats. Suppose a particular meat has got very high cholesterol levels. So you could tailor a meat and make it in a factory where you can reduce the cholesterol level of that meat. So that is another trend. with the shrinking land mass of the world and the ever increasing population, farming as an activity, is on the decline. So one promising trend is hydroponics, that is growing vegetables, fruits, other kind of plants, etc. in water. That is another trend. A very interesting trend that hopefully will come is guilt-free foods. So while fast food is considered unhealthy, much of healthy food is considered not so tasty. So what we are expecting is that there would be a trend of foods that are tasty, but you remove all the health hazards from that food. So you could eat them in quantities that you like and yet not gain weight or get some of these lifestyle diseases like diabetes and blood pressure, etc. One more trend that is in the offing is meal replacement beverages. So with the lack of time, people have less and less time to eat food. While we'd like them to sample 3-4 course menus, 5 course menus, tasting menus, etc. Sometimes you don't have the time. So beverages which give you the same feeling of eating a 3 to 4 course meal could also be a future trend. We don't know when these trends would become commonplace, but I believe it will be sooner rather than later. Thank you so much for your time.